Helen Aquino, and I'm the Director of Brand Marketing of Village Farms Greenhouse Grown. We're one of the largest tomato, pepper, and cucumber growers in North America. We have farms in the United States, out in Texas, and then also up in Canada and down in Mexico as well. And we service retail and food service around the United States and Canada. And today I wanted to talk to you about the future of fresh, and particularly a type of growing method in greenhouses called controlled environment agriculture. And I also want to touch on, so this is the supply side. I also want to touch on the demand side, and because I know that's more interesting to you guys, and how consumers think and how they're relating with food right now, particularly in their purchasing behavior, and then some of the generational differences of food. So you might notice that I titled the presentation From Fork to Farm. Many times we hear the term when you're looking at the whole value chain of food as farm to fork. However, as we've seen in a number of the presentations today, the demand side, or the consumer, is super important to understand the equation of where we're going in the future, particularly in fresh. And by the way, a fork is technology, right? Okay, so over the past decades, we've seen changing in farming, particularly in the United States. And that change has really affected how food is grown and produced in the United States. And at the heart of the transformation is really this type of farming, a particular type of farming in greenhouses called controlled environment agriculture. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that, as I mentioned, and also talk to you about the sustainable aspects of that type of farming, and also the demand as far as how consumers are really interested in these types of products, and also how there could be opportunity for the food service sector, particularly chefs, for this type of farming. So currently in the United States, we have less farms growing fresh, and we have a much greater dependency on imported food. You see that when you go to the grocery store, right? You see food from all over the place, and you see food that's available now all year round. And that's because the consumer is maybe a little bit spoiled, right? We have the opportunity to buy things all year round. We want really fresh, high quality, and I'm saying we because it myself included. I go to the grocery store and I see a beautiful display of tomatoes in the middle of winter, and I want the freshest tomato, not realizing that, hey, most of these are probably not grown in the United States this time of year, but that's what I've come to expect. So the seasonality has kind of been taken out of fruits and vegetables. You can get berries year round, you can find asparagus from Chile in the middle of winter, and this really has upped the bar and the expectation of consumers. But the good news is that technology on the grow side has really helped advance this. So in the seed varietals, and these are hybridized seed, in the post-harvest technologies, and in the growing methods. And this has to happen because produce travels a long distance in the United States, right? We have a big country, we have produce growing in California, we have produce growing in Mexico, we have produce growing in Canada, we have produce growing in other countries, and it's traveling long distance. So the idea that now varieties need to include this shelf life is very, very important. And it also, because of this, has caused a lot of farmers to go out of farming. Because face it, it's a tough business, right? You have a highly perishable product. Depending on market conditions, you can't just, put it in the cooler and wait for the market to get better. You have to sell it. You have to sell it fast. And so that's one of the issues that's a real disincentive for farmers. And then you have the big one, which is labor. We are really lacking in farm labor here in the United States. We rely on what's called H-2A labor for farms in the US. And that H-2A labor is farmers that are coming and the companies supporting to live here, work here, but those programs are only 10 months out of the year. So what do farms do that are, like us, greenhouses, that are operating 365 days a year? It's a real issue. So I wanted to just show you a little bit about the history of farms in the US, and don't get too intimidated by this eye chart, but it kind of just gives a real nice history of farms through the ages. So you can see since 1850 that the number of farms, that's the blue line, and it kind of peaked in the 1950s. And at the same time, the size of the average farm increased. And then the farms just started to decline as a whole, and that's because we're more dependent on imports right now. Because of all the reasons that I mentioned, that farming is tough and not everybody wants to be a farmer. And in fact, farmers are aging out. The average age of the farmer in Holland is 55 years old. So it's a 24/7 job. You can't, it's like your plants are like your kids, right? You can't just leave them alone. You have to constantly be, and I'm just speaking about fruits and vegetables now, not cash crops per se. So this is an issue, and technology has really been working to try to solve that issue. So just to give you a little idea about the greenhouse market, it's a huge market, and it's a growing market. In the United States, it's almost $3 billion, and it has a projected growth of 8% through 2030. And why is this? Well, we have a shift in the agricultural practices, as I mentioned, but it also has to do with viable land. So there's less viable farmland to farm on. So we need to find agricultural practices that are more sustainable. So things that solve the problem of groundwater depletion or soil degradation, these are all being solved by greenhouses. And the big growth sector in the greenhouse market is fruits, vegetables, herbs, flowers, and ornamentals. And that accounted for 52% of the market share. So fruits and vegetables and herbs are further segmented into tomatoes, lettuce, bell peppers, and chili peppers, strawberries and cucumbers. The three crops that I mentioned, the company I work for grows. So that's good opportunity for us. Tomatoes actually held the largest market share in 2023, just to give you some numbers about tomatoes. So the good thing about greenhouses in the United States is for tomatoes is that there's sufficient sunshine and sunlight. So most of the greenhouses in the US don't use LED lighting. Just to give you a little bit more detail on tomatoes, my favorite. The US population, though increasing, share of stomach has remained the same. I think it's per capita 16 pounds per person. How many people eat tomatoes here? All right, good. Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. So I eat a lot of tomatoes, probably more than 16 pounds a year, but that's the average. But it hasn't really changed for a number of years. And U.S. production of tomatoes has decreased by 52%. So greenhouses are a good solution for tomatoes. And I know people love greenhouse tomatoes. I was thinking about this when we were hearing the chefs speak right before lunch and talking about the idea of food cultural values. It seems like in every culture, people use tomatoes and love tomatoes. And I've been working for Village Farms for 18 years. All of the consumer emails and phone calls come to me. And yeah, I know it's a lot, but it's fun. It's good market research. And what I would hear over and over again from people is that, I stopped eating tomatoes because they tasted like styrofoam or cardboard. They had no flavor. But then I found yours, and they reminded me of picking the tomatoes in my grandparents' garden or the tomatoes I ate when I was a kid. And now I want to eat tomatoes again. And from that, I came up with a tagline, Garden Fresh Flavor. And that's been really strong for us. So it's kind of another example of where the supply has influenced the demand, and the feedback from consumers have really influenced our marketing efforts. So just to give you a little more big picture on produce consumption here in the US. Oh, wait, sorry. I'm a little nervous. I wanted to just dig in a little bit more on the greenhouse story. How many people are familiar with greenhouses here? Nice, okay, a lot of people. So as you know, there's very different types of greenhouses. Plants in the ground, covered in a hoop system with plastic is a greenhouse. Something like we grow in, that's a glass greenhouse, dependent on the sun, using hydroponics, and with a controlled temperature and climate system, that's a greenhouse. But greenhouses started as early as the 1st century. The Italian emperor Tiberius really wanted to eat his cucumbers every day. And so they figured out a way to protect the crop and grow it year round. And so this type of farming was really developed in the countries where there were longer winters and they wanted to have access to fruits and vegetables. And right now, Holland is pretty much the mecca of greenhouse and the development of greenhouse technology. They built their first greenhouses in the 17th century and haven't looked back since then. And a lot of our growers in the company are actually Dutch, and their fathers were growers, and they come from a long line of family growers, which is kind of cool when you look at the history. Like, who would want to keep going into farming when they know it's so tough, But it's a passion, and it's something that they know and love doing. So that's a really good thing. All right. Here's a picture of the Westland area of Holland, and you can see the patchwork of greenhouses. It's the largest area of greenhouses, not in the world, but of high-tech greenhouses. And wow, over 6,000 acres under glass. There's also big greenhouse areas in a lot of the Mediterranean countries, in Spain, in Turkey, in England, China. Those aren't Mediterranean countries, but you know what I'm saying, yeah. So I want to get a little bit more detailed on controlled environment agriculture and the benefits of that. Here's a picture of one of our greenhouses. As you can see, it looks like a really large indoor garden. They have an average footprint of 30 acres under glass. And the crops are growing. Tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers are vining crops. So they're growing up like 30 feet tall in the greenhouse. And they're always harvesting from the lower part of the plant. And controlled environment agriculture is really beneficial for a number of reasons. You have precise control over the crop. Why is that important? Well, Mother Nature is moody. And sometimes she does things that it makes it really tough to be a farmer. So being in a greenhouse, you have a little bit more control over the temperature, over when you're giving the water, when you're giving the nutrients. And these things all contribute to a more consistent quality product. The other benefit of greenhouses is that you can extend the season for longer. That's why we get our tomatoes in the winter. And that you can grow in areas you might not normally be able to grow, which is a really great thing. So ideally, you could have the source of production closer to the urbanized areas. And as I mentioned, there's the different types of greenhouses, the glass, the plastic, but the vertical farms also fall under controlled environment agriculture, as well as indoor farms. But the focus that I'm going to be mainly looking at is the glass greenhouses. All right, so did I turn that? All right, here's a nice picture of our greenhouse as well. That's one of our farmers. We actually call farmers in greenhouses growers. So that's our grower, Abby. She's out in our greenhouse in West Texas. And she's up on the lift between the rows of plants is like a little train rail car system. And then it has kind of a scissor hydraulic lift. So the farmers can go up, the growers can go up and look at the health of the plants and see how things are doing. So we talked about some of the benefits, the increased yields, the reduced waste, the year-round production, and the improved quality. And then to touch a little bit more on the challenges, well, why doesn't everyone grow in greenhouses? Well, it's got a huge barrier to entry as far as the costs. There's high initial startup costs, estimated at about $1 million an acre. There is energy consumption costs, and there's also scalability. So you have to pay the grower that's trained in this type of farming. And you also have to estimate what crops you need for the demand for the area. So that's sometimes a little touchy for people. And if you're following anything in the greenhouse industry lately, you might have noticed some of these startup greenhouses like App Harvest in Kentucky that didn't do a good job doing that, and they went out of business. So it's a tough business being a farmer. This is a copy of a marketing sheet we put together for our customer, the retailer, to explain more about the benefits of greenhouse growing. And I coined it the Good for the Earth platform. So it gives very basic information about the benefits, the sustainability story. I talked about increased yields and using less land. We actually, for tomatoes, use 30 times, we get 30 times more yield compared to field growing. That's very significant. So a 40-acre greenhouse is the same as 1,200 acres of growing outside. Sorry, I talk with my hands a lot. Less water. This is kind of mind-boggling. We use 86% less water compared to a tomato grown out in a field. And then chemical use. So as you know, all agriculture is dependent on some kind of chemicals, even organic agriculture. And in an enclosed environment, you're much more able to use more natural methods. So what we use is something called integrated pest management. That can be used outdoors as well, but it's very successful indoors. It's basically where we have predator insects that are eating the bad bugs. And that's a really good thing. And then we're using less CO2 in comparison to other indoor growing methods. We have a boiler that heats the greenhouse when it's cold. The byproduct of that is CO2, and that's pumped back into the greenhouse because plants like CO2, right? Photosynthesis. So that's a very healthy thing. And we also use what's called cogeneration. So at our greenhouse up in Canada, there's a landfill across the street. Landfill's byproduct is methane gas. We take that methane gas and we pump it into our energy station that's next door, and it converts it to two types of energy for the greenhouse, heat and electricity. So that's a really good thing too. And then we just like to say, you know, we're growing more food efficiently using less resources. That's healthy for people and the planet. So that's a little bit of my shameless self-promotion there. We're going to have tomato samples too for you guys all to try. All right, let's look more now on the demand side. This is looking at our retail. So this is data from retailers. You know, when you go to the store and they scan the data. So this is point of sale data, looking at dollars in volume. And you can see in 2024, all produce is about a $92 billion business. That's huge, just retail, not including food service. And the thing about that is it's still growing. This report, actually, I should point out, is not my data. It's from the Food Marketing Institute, and Anne-Marie Roerink from 210 Analytics put this together. So if anybody wants her contact, let me know. So why is this still a growing market? It seems kind of obvious, right? We all like fresh fruits and vegetables, but there seems to be lately a growth trend towards more nutrition and more. 34% of consumers say they put a lot of thought and effort into purchasing nutritious produce. That's good news. So I want to break that down a little bit more. This is another slide from FMI. And it's interesting to see how consumers are embracing technology for meal planning and using AI. So even ChatGPT, which, you know, is pretty new, 7% of consumers are saying they're using ChatGPT for meal planning. 44% still rely on friends and family. Not really a tech, but you know, YouTube is mentioned here, and TikTok and Instagram. So it's a growing trend. And I wanted to show how that's impacted by the different generations. So when you look at the generational differences, you can see that Gen Z and millennials are really on the forefront of looking at things like discovering a new fresh fruit or vegetable through social media, or discovering a new way to enjoy and prepare foods. The younger generations, Gen Z and millennials, seem to be leading the charge there and embracing the viral food trends. And this is a little more background about some of the generational differences for produce consumption. And it's really interesting to see that, the millennials and Gen Z are really into the health conscious, sustainability and ethics, convenience, food experiences. And baby boomers, like myself and older generations, Gen X, really like more traditional habits, and in general, they consume less fruits and vegetables, and they have less exposure to the social media and food discussions. So I thought that was really interesting, especially given some of the other presentations today, looking at the adoption of technology. So overall, Gen X and boomers that I don't have listed here, they like food quality, comfort, convenience, and food quality is really the focus. So that could show some of the growth in fresh. But they're more apt towards traditional food and not trying new things. And then the general trends for all are, as we mentioned, the increased demand for fresh, a rise of organic and local, the social media, and then also a focus on transparency and animal welfare. Okay, so I want to just wrap it up a little bit, but also talk about food away from home, which everybody in food service, this is probably of interest. We see, again, millennials and Gen Z are spending more out compared to boomers and Gen X, on an average of $3,455 per year for millennials, and just about 2,500 annually for Gen Z. They're also using food apps quite more as well. And sorry to make this a bit of an eye chart too. And this is just kind of categorizing what I've already spoken about related to the generations. So you can see that even amongst the millennials and Gen Z that are more interested in trying new things and are more interested in food experiences, there are some subtle differences as well. Particularly with the millennials, they seem to be a little less conservative than the Gen Z. They want sustainable options. They're early adopters on apps. They love the whole beauty of the food experience. And they opt for more farm-to-table experiences, which is really good news for food service. I'm not going to go into the tipping, but I did put it on there. Okay, just to kind of wrap this up, originally, when I made this presentation, I talked more about the company and the supply side and what's going on the farming sector. And I thought it would be really interesting to look at more what's going on the demand side too, for everybody to understand. And after doing this research and putting this together, I realized that there's a lot of opportunity, particularly for food service, in appealing to the younger generations. And the artificial intelligence that we've been talking about, I think that and some of the cultured meat technology, I feel like the younger generations may be more open to understanding the benefits of those. So all political things aside right now and economy, I think we have a lot of hope for the future of food. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
Really good. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're going to let you all taste these wonderful tomatoes as well, because what better way of understanding the amazing work that Helen is doing than actually tasting it. So we don't need to leave. You don't need to go outside, because our next speaker is going to be amazing as well. But as you sit and go through the next speech, we're going to bring these tomatoes in and you're going to get to taste them. I'm told we have time for one question from the audience. Does anyone have anything to ask?
You mentioned you also operate in Mexico.
Yes.
So what are the challenges in working in a country like Mexico versus the US?
Great question.
Well,
For this specific technology, I mean.
for this specific technology, greenhouses in the area of Mexico where we grow get a lot hotter. So we have to use other technology solutions like shade screens to make sure that the crop is in the best quality. Mexico actually has better access to labor, so that's a real benefit for us. And if you look at the food supply overall in the US, right now about 60% of our fresh fruits and vegetables are coming from Mexico. So it's really more of a plus, a lot of the benefits from Mexico.
And one more, because he's the boss and I have to take his questions.
Not just, we've been talking, sorry, I know we have a few minutes, but since we're talking about the future and how to make this more available, in terms of technology and the easiness of getting that technology, like, can we talk about decentralization, having more growing farms, serving communities? I mean, that picture of Amsterdam is, Holland, sorry, it's impressive how many acres of urban farm. But can we take that same concept and instead of having those massive lands full of those farms, like, can we decentralize and have like smaller versions serving like local communities, and how the technology that you are applying into that scale can be applied to like community level?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I didn't really touch on that in my presentation, but for sure, this technology is poised to be something where the build can be closer to the source of production, to consumption, sorry. So in theory, but there are still some limitations with the production. If cost wasn't an issue, there would be, of course, a lot more greenhouses located near city centers. But the cost of the technology, the cost of the energy is a big deterrent. But with the introduction of more robotic systems, so less dependent on labor for picking, for packing, that becomes more possible. And as more of these solutions become available and the market becomes more available for this technology, you'll see the cost obviously go down, and hopefully then we'll start seeing more of these types of projects. Yeah.
Thank you, Helen. Please, a big round of applause to Helen.
Thank you. Thank you.